like to do for you is a monologue in character, a different perspective maybe than what you've taken before on Holy Week. I first did this 25 plus years ago and have been looking for an opportunity to do it again. And so, sorry?
I think it was longer ago than that.
Maybe longer ago. She's aging me. So, if I'm a little rusty, it is a complete rewrite, so forgive me. But I'm going to attempt to give you a first-hand eyewitness account of the events that unfolded during Holy Week from a unique perspective this morning. So, let me grab a drink of water to wet my whistle, as my granddad used to say, and then I'll come back in character and give you a different perspective on Holy Week today. Good morning. My name is Marcus Flavin Augustus. I'm commander of the 1st Infantry cohort of the 1st Sebasteni Legion of the Roman Empire. I serve at the pleasure of Emperor Tiberius under the command of Pontius Pilate in the city of Jerusalem, which you may call the Holy City. I'm here today to tell you about the significant unfolding events in the Holy City this week. I want to give you a first-hand perspective on what I saw and what I believe. It all began a week ago. On Sunday, my men and I were stationed outside the eastern gate of the Temple Mount. Thousands, in fact tens of thousands of pilgrims are streaming into the city for Holy Week. As you know, it's Passover week. Coming from all nations and all areas. And the one thing a Roman legion must do during that period of time is maintain order. So my men and I were stationed outside the walls, watching the huge crowds of people come. Facing eastward with the hot sun on our back, looking up or down into the Kidron Valley and up the meandering path to the Mount of Olives. And off in the distance, a massive crowd gathered. And they made their way down the path. And you could tell there was a head to the path, and everybody followed. You could just hear a buzz, or you might even say a roar in the distance, but you couldn't make it out for quite some time. But it caught my attention, and the attention of all my men. And as the crowd approached, you could begin to make out something distinct from the cacophony of noise. They were singing. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. And as they approached, it got louder and louder. And you could begin to distinguish voices from the crowd saying, "Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord." And as they grew closer and closer, the strangest thing happened. People began to take off their outer wrap and throw it in the road. They picked palm branches and fronds from the trees and began to wave them. Who is this who is coming into the city? I'm a veteran of many wars and have served decades in the Legion, and I've never seen anything like this. I got no word of a dignitary that was due to arrive today. Who is it? A king? A prince? I turned to my men. Are we expecting someone important today? And none of them knew of any. But as they approached, the strangest sight unfolded before my eyes. When the crowd got close enough to the city, got to the bottom of Mount of Olives, past the Garden of Gethsemane, and started up the meandering path to the city gates, I could see there was a lone figure at the head of the pack, riding a donkey. Not some king with some massive profession or procession, but a single man riding a colt, wearing a white robe with flowing black hair and beard. The crowds were heaping adulation on him and singing at the top of their voice. And he waved politely, but there was an odd mix of joy and sadness in his countenance. He continued to approach the city, and the crowds grew larger and larger and larger. And my men were afraid they would overrun the city gate. And as he got closer and closer to me, I could see there was a small band of men following behind him. And then as he passed by me on the donkey, there was such a strong smell of expensive perfume. But that's not what struck me most about this traveler. It was the look in his eyes. In the midst of all this joy and adoration, he was weeping. Tears were streaming down his face as he entered the city gates. I wondered, would I ever see this man again? Who was this man? I turned to one of my soldiers and asked him, "Who is this?" He said, "They call him Jesus. He's from Nazareth in Galilee. He's a carpenter's son." Perplexed by that story, unable to understand what I'd just witnessed with my own eyes, we served out the rest of our watch as tens of thousands of people flooded into the city through that gate behind it. We finished our watch at night and went back into our barracks, only to return again the next day. And we heard that he had gone from there into the temple directly. We heard about the disturbance the next day when we returned for our watch. Apparently, he had gone to the temple and found there merchants and money changers. It is Passover week and sacrifices are being offered. But he took offense that they were in the temple. And he cleared the temple, turned over the money tables, and chased off the merchants, and greatly angered the religious elite. We heard that story when we arrived on the scene today, on Monday. We were at the temple, and it was our job again to maintain order in the city. And now we're not allowed in the temple proper, but we're stationed inside the walls in what's called the cohort of Gentiles. And it's so packed inside the walls you can't move. Thousands of people are there. And they're all centered around him. There he is again, commanding their attention, teaching parable after parable, sharing story after story. I've never seen such a massive crowd so silent in my life. They hung on his every word. But not everybody was happy. There, on the outer edges, were the clergy, all the religious elite of the day. And you could see the anger in their eyes as they seethed. Who was this man from Galilee? A carpenter's son, no less, holding court in their city under their very noses. He did that again on Tuesday and again on Wednesday. And the crowds, if it's possible, grew larger and larger each day. And the religious leaders grew more and more incensed by the moment. As a Roman centurion, we're trained to watch those things. And I knew trouble was brewing. You could see it. You could feel it. You could cut it with a knife. It was so thick in the air. The crowds were oblivious to all of that, Jesus wasn't. You could sense that he knew. But the crowds, as I said, they just were mesmerized by him. 3 long days that went on. From daylight to dark, he would teach in the temple. He would leave the city at night and go down that meandering path through the Garden of Gethsemane, up the Mount of Olives, and over the hill to Bethany. I'm told he stayed with friends there. And in the morning, he would make that trip again and return to the city, back to the temple. On Thursday, there was a bit of a reprieve. As you know, Thursday is a day of preparation for Passover. So the crowds were smaller as people were making their individual preparations. And Jesus was not there in the temple that day. He was meeting, I'm told, privately with his disciples, making preparation for the feast and the festival on their own. So that day passed without much event. My men and I got a bit of a reprieve. But it was still late that night when I lay down to get some rest. I had not nodded off more than a few minutes when one of my men came barging into my tent, shouting at the top of his voice, "Commander, Commander, come quickly, there's a disturbance." "A disturbance at this hour? Where?" I said. "At the high priest's house. Come quickly." Well, I got up, put on my clothes, grabbed my sword and my shield, marshaled a few of my troops, and off we went to Caiaphas' house. And when we arrived there, indeed, there was the high priest and all the elders surrounded by the temple guards. And in their midst was an odd man out. I'd seen him before, but I didn't know his name. I gazed intently upon him and looked at the high priest and wondering what is going on here. Why are all these people gathered together in the middle of the night? Why am I being summoned to this procession? And Caiaphas turned to the man and said, "Judas, it's time to go. Lead us to him." The temple guard rushed out of the high priest's house, with Judas leading the way. We knew there was trouble coming, so my men and I followed behind. We made our way down the meandering road from the Temple Mount into the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Judas departed back to a secluded private place in the garden. And there he was again, standing there with his closest men. Some were sleeping, some were obviously praying, but Jesus was standing and facing into the crowd that we brought. Judas made his way over to Jesus, walked up to him and embraced him, kissed him on both cheeks. And before the embrace was broken, the guards grabbed him by his arms as if to arrest him. One of his men jumped up, drew a sword, and chopped off the ear of one of my men. Malchus was bleeding profusely. Jesus said, "Shall I not accept this cup?" Reached down, grabbed the severed ear, replaced it to Malchus's side, and the hemorrhaging stopped. I couldn't believe what I just witnessed. Then the guards seized him. The temple guards that are under the command of the high priest. They bound his hands and turned to lead him away. So my men and I followed. Made our way back into the city, back to the area where the former high priest lived, Annas, actually Caiaphas' father-in-law, who had previously served as high priest. And Annas questioned him about his teaching and about his disciples. And Jesus remained silent. So the temple guards whisked him out. And down the road we went to Caiaphas' house, who was waiting there, this time with the elders and many of the Sanhedrin. And they, in turn, questioned him. Now, mind you, this is in the middle of the night. And by their own laws, this was an illegal tribunal. But they were so enraged and so incensed with the reception he had received in the city and the impact he was making on their people. They didn't care. They broke all the laws. They questioned him for hours. Caiaphas finally asked him, "Are you the Christ?" Jesus looked intently into his eyes and said, "You have said it yourself." Immediately the high priest ripped his robe, cried out in a loud voice, "Blasphemy!" It was nearly dawn by now. We gathered Jesus, the temple guard led him out. They had convened the whole Sanhedrin now. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the elders, the scribes, they were all there now. Jesus was brought before them in a trial. My men and I stood by to watch, trying to maintain order, to do the best we could in a very unexpected situation. They mocked him. They spat on him. They beat him with fists. I've never seen a man treated like this for teaching. It was now dawn, and he stood trial before the Sanhedrin. The same series of questions came, the same accusations levied and vehemently threatened by the religious leaders. They said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." He said to them, "If I did, you wouldn't believe me." "Are you the Son of God?" they demanded. He said, "You have said it." Again, there was a loud cry from the group. Blasphemy went up all over the room. We knew at that point in time something had to be done, or they were going to take action that would cause pain and suffering for me and my men. We were about to lose order in the city in the middle of the festival week. So we rushed him to Pilate. And the religious leaders made their case before Pilate over and over and over again, accusing him of causing riots and disorder in the city. And like the Jewish leaders, Pilate questioned Jesus too. He asked him questions after question. "Are you the King of the Jews?" he said. Jesus said to Pilate, "It is you that say that I am." Pilate asked more questions and then finally turned to the religious leaders and said, "I find no fault in this man, worthy of death. But as it is Passover week, and as the tradition has always held, I will release one prisoner to you." By this time, in the courtyard, a massive crowd had assembled. But this crowd looked much different than the crowd that we'd seen in the temple grounds earlier in the week. This crowd was filled with the religious elite and with their friends and their family members. And this crowd had a very different sentiment toward Jesus. And Pilate said to them, "I think I'll just have him released. I'll have him flogged, but I'll release him for Passover." And the crowd shouted in one voice, "No! Give us Barabbas," they said. Barabbas, I thought. Barabbas was a convicted murderer, an insurrectionist, a threat to the Roman Empire. And they wanted Barabbas? What caused such hatred of this man? 3 times, Pilate asked them, shall I not release Jesus? 3 times they demanded, give us Barabbas. Pilate turned to them and said, behold this man. What shall I do with Jesus? And you know what they said? Crucify him. Crucify him. Crucify him. The crowd got louder and louder and closer to riot. And Pilate knew something had to be done, or he was about to lose order forever in the city. He walked to a wash basin, washed his hands, turned to the religious leaders and said, I find no fault in this man, certainly nothing worthy of death. His blood is on your hands. And that's when he turned to me. He said, do it. Now, I've seen many men convicted in my tenure, and we have executed many criminals, but never an innocent man. We did as we were ordered, soldiers as we are. We took him into possession. We flogged him and scourged him as any criminal would be. He was already weak. They had paraded him all over the city, to Pilate, to Herod, to Caiaphas, to Annas. No food, no water. He'd been up for over a full day, and now he'd been beaten. He was so weak he could barely stand. We dragged the cross up, laid it on his shoulder, and out the city gates we went. It's a requirement that criminals carry their own cross. The 2 criminals that were being crucified with him were halfway up the hill, and Jesus lingered behind. We got a few hundred yards outside the city gates, and he collapsed under the weight of the cross. Fell to his knees, tried to get up, and fell again. It was approaching 9 o'clock in the morning. He'd been up all night. There were pilgrims coming in from that side of the city. And I saw a strong man in the crowd, a Centurion. I said, you, carry his cross. So we picked it up as ordered, and up the hill we went. Out to a place called Golgotha. They call it the skull, where criminals are crucified. When we were there, we first crucified the 2 criminals, one on the left and one on the right. And they fought us tooth and nail. It took 6 men to hold them down, to drive the nails in their hands and feet. But not Jesus. He voluntarily laid down, spread out his arms, extended his feet. Now, I've seen many nails driven through criminals' hands and feet. I don't remember ever hearing the sound because there was so much screaming. But I heard the sounds when the nails were driven through Jesus' hands and feet. And I saw the sadness in his eyes. My men raised up the cross, and one nailed a sign above his head that said, King of the Jews in Aramaic. And when the post was dropped into the ground, you could hear the bones break and the flesh tear. They didn't make a sound. For 3 hours, he hung there on the cross. Passerbys hurling insults at him, spitting on him, calling him all kinds of names, challenging him. King of the Jews, get down off the cross. Save yourself. The criminals on both sides. One continually heaped insults at Jesus. Finally, the one on the left said, have you no fear? We deserve our punishment. But this man is innocent. He turned and looked at Jesus beside him and said, Lord, remember me when you enter into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, verily I say to you, this day you will be with me in paradise. In the midst of all of that pain and suffering and agony, it was a gracious act I've never seen before. For 3 hours, he hung there, from 9 until noon. And then the most frightening thing happened. The earth went black. Not a light in the sky. Only the light of our campfire and the light of our torches, or we would not have been able to see. The sun, the moon, the stars, all gone. Total darkness. It stayed that way for 3 long hours. And then suddenly, there was a mighty earthquake. Rocks split everywhere. The darkness lifted, the light shone forth. Jesus, who had been silent, cried out, my God, why have thou forsaken me? Then he whispered, it is finished. And again, in a loud voice, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And he was gone. I turned and looked at my men, and I said, surely this was the Son of God. It was almost sunset now, and Passover approached. And the Jews did not want those bodies on the cross at sunset. And they demanded to Pilate that they be removed. Criminals were removed first, but then Nicodemus and Joseph came. They had appealed to Pilate for Jesus' body. And Pilate had granted them that privilege. So they took him down gingerly, wrapped him in fine linens. Nicodemus carried almost a man's weight in spices, and they prepared him for burial. The sun was setting, the day was almost gone. And they took him to a brand new tomb, one that had never been used before, owned by a man named Joseph of Arimathea. And they laid him there, rolled a heavy stone over the opening. And finally, a long day had come to a close. Back in my quarters again, trying to get some much-needed rest, another messenger arrived. Commander, come quickly. Pilate has summoned you again. Again, I get up, I dress, I rush off to Pilate's. Pilate says, station a guard at the tomb. The Jews are afraid someone will steal the body. I knew that was not possible. It had taken 6 men to roll the stone over the tomb. But we did as we were told. We set up guards, and Saturday was a quiet day. It was a Sabbath. And then, as dawn began to break on Sunday morning, it happened. The earth shook again. A mighty earthquake, and an angel descended from heaven. I saw it with my own eyes and rolled away the stone. We were terrified, immobilized in fear. And then a group of women approached. And the angel said to them, do not be afraid. He's not here. He is risen. Go and tell the brothers. And they turned and headed back to where the disciples were gathered, and Mary encountered a man that she thought was the gardener. And she said, "Sir, tell me where they put him," still reeling from comprehension of what she had seen. He said, "Mary." And it was like scales fell from her eyes. Immediately, she recognized him. It's the Lord. Jesus said, "Go and tell the brothers." And so they all scurried off to find Peter and James and John and all the brothers. And we took our leave to go tell Pilate and the high priest. When my men went in to tell high priest, I went to Pilate as it was my responsibility to tell him. But when my men went to tell the high priest and the temple guard, they said, "Oh, this news can't be shared." And they bribed my men a great sum, many years' wages, to say that the body had been stolen, that he hadn't been resurrected. But we knew the truth. We had been there. We had seen it with our own eyes. Indeed, we were not alone. Jesus appeared to Simon Peter. He appeared to the women. He appeared to the 11 in the upper room, in the locked room. He appeared to 500 or more people. We knew he was alive. He indeed had been resurrected. So I'm here today to tell you there's good news in Jerusalem. The Son of God lives.